Welcome to Momdaze, a beautiful collective of mamas and experts sharing wisdom, inspiration, and life hacks to support us on this journey through the hazy days of motherhood. Welcome to the Momdaze podcast. I'm your host, Holly Lowe, and joining me as we do every month, my beautiful sister, Dawn Calvinisti, all the way from Guatemala, for our episode of What Your Mama Didn't Tell You. So we've been talking reproductive health, and, I think we've up to this point covered things like periods, our cycles, teaching our kids about cycles, boys and girls, and removing some of the mystery around period health and what that is. I really want to start going in the direction now of, we could talk what your mama didn't tell you about sex, but we'll save that for another conversation because that could be a whole other ballgame, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna do more of a focus on our, fertility, as that's where we're heading with this series. And I want to talk about what we didn't know or even still aren't teaching maybe about making babies. Sound good?
Sure. So making babies, but not the sex part of making babies.
Right. More of the actual mechanics of what's happening with our body, because I think if we can, I know as a mom, I am much more comfortable, and as a homeschool mom, I'm much more comfortable having these conversations in a lesson format, where you're like, hey, this is just the life cycle of a human.
Yeah.
We've done the life cycle of a chicken. We've done the life cycle of a plant. Now this is where babies come from. So I think if we can step it out of the sensual, sexual part of what that looks like. I mean, there is a whole component to that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to keep it age appropriate and to keep it to our kids' understanding of where they're at, and giving it, I think, just a better, physiological standpoint. In my case, anyway. I don't know. Maybe would you agree that that makes it a little simpler to share this information?
Yeah, I think so, because it is, and again, coming from a homeschooling mom, I think it's just easier to be able to say, like, these things already. Here's how it works in a human, right? So I think it is way simpler when we just take the science of it.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at today. That's what I want to do. I want to talk. I mean, we as mamas who've had babies, we know how that happened. Right? But
I think so.
Most of us do. But the funny thing is that the number of, and when we were both, active doulas and supporting women in birth, the number of young or single or teen moms that I would have, whether I supported them as a doula or just in conversing through my business, who honestly they had no idea that there was only a few days in the month they could get pregnant, that, birth control is only one option, and that their window of the ability to get pregnant, to make a baby, was actually really small. And I was, even at my age, before I had babies, I was always curious about that. I always thought, really, like, how are there all these accidental pregnancies, right? In reality, how are they not understanding, number one, their cycle well enough to know that, and number two, just the process of what's happening in their body. And when we are, intimate, when we have multiple partners, if you're living that kind of life, whatever that looks like, what are the chances? So I don't know. Those are things that were never discussed, even in high school health. So I think in high school, we talked about sex ed, like, I'm trying to even remember, honestly. We talked about condoms. We talked about, I don't even know if we discussed the pill. We talked about how males have a sperm, women have an egg, and that's what needs to meet to make a baby. That literally was the extent of our health class, and it was taught by our phys ed teacher.
Yeah. And I like, the thing that stands out to me, the only thing that I remember from health class was we watched a video of the woman's reproductive system from the inside with a camera, and it looked like pink flowers, and I just thought, wow, we're really good looking inside. Like, I remember thinking, like, oh, that's really pretty. I don't remember learning anything or remember anything about what that had to do with my cycle or like any of that. I don't remember discussing. I remember discussing what a period was, but
Yeah.
again, not what a cycle was, not what, you know, like what a fertility cycle was, not what fertility health was. I do remember a condom conversation. I don't remember a pill conversation either. Maybe it was in there somewhere. But yeah, there was very, very limited info. And I never learned any of that from my mom. So I didn't have any info.
Interesting, right? And I don't think we ever had those conversations, you and I.
No, no,
I
I
honestly
probably didn't know.
Right. I don't, and I never asked. It was one of those things where I wasn't that curious about that kind of thing. I made a lot of assumptions. Like
Hmm.
looking back, I know I had a ton of assumptions based on things you piece together, right? You're
Right,
like, well, I
right.
think I know that, and I kind of know this, and well, I should probably just avoid it altogether because I don't know what I'm doing. Right. That was my
Yeah.
take on it. I'm like, well, I don't want to get pregnant, and I certainly don't want to mess with hormone stuff. So that was just my view of it. But I remember I had friends in my dance classes in high school who got pregnant in grade 9 and 10, like
Hmm.
16 years old. And I just remember thinking in my head to myself, how did they not know? Right? How did that happen? How did you not know? But again, having those conversations then as I got older, realizing they truly did not understand. They
Hmm.
truly didn't get that even just with or without birth control, they truly didn't get the mechanics of what their body did and does and how that works. So, I mean, we're not going to get into follicular phases and, all of that, but even just the bare basics of understanding that we have ovaries. This is what they look like. This is where they attach to. We have an apron. I should have grabbed it for this episode. We have an apron downstairs that we use, and it's a plastic apron. It's got all the body parts that are like,
Hmm.
sewn, and you can take them
Hmm.
on and off, and your stomach and everything. But it doesn't have any reproductive organs. It basically goes down to the bowel, and that's it. So we were doing this when we were going through the internal organs of the body in one of our lessons, and I remember Ashton put it on, and I went, okay, buddy, that's pretty cool because your bowel's hanging down at your knees. So we should probably pull this up a bit. But I put it on me, and then I'm like, okay, and this big area that's missing in here, that's where the babies are made, right? And it was just that moment of like, there's so many opportunities to teach this in age appropriate ways and in simple methods that are just not they're not there. They're just not applied for men and women.
Right,
The
right.
other thing I think is really important is that it is always, even to this day, focused on women understanding it.
Yes.
Would you
Yeah,
agree?
it's our responsibility. It's for sure our responsibility because we're the one who gets pregnant. So therefore, we should know it all,
Even when it
right? And
comes to fertility issues, I had this conversation just yesterday on one of our coaching calls, and this mama was like, "Hey, she's going to come on our podcast. She's going to be chatting about this, but she's like, why? Why is the first initial assessment, if you are having trouble getting pregnant, it's all about the women? Test the women, get everything out of the women when meanwhile it was her husband. And they went through
right,
all these things, all these scenarios until they finally were like, oh, by the way, it's him. You're perfectly
right,
fine. But
right.
again, I think it's having these conversations and shifting it and not being afraid to have them with our boys too.
Yeah. But I think even like as a mom, one of the things I think is important, and I have two girls and a boy, is even explaining like the genitals, explaining like where you go pee from, where you go poo from, like that boys and girls are different. Because just to say they're different because they've got something that sticks out and we don't, like that's almost how it's left.
Yes.
And having the conversation, and even we just revisited this. I swear this was like just a couple months ago, where we had to revisit again to say, no, babies don't come out from where you pee from,
Right.
right? And we have had that conversation, but obviously there's been some time since we've had it. And so having to revisit that, women actually have three holes down there and boys only have two. And,
We
you
just
know,
talked about this.
all of
That's so
that,
funny.
like
Yeah.
just having those conversations because the kids like that. Like kids are all into like, tell me the gross stuff, right? Like snot,
Yep.
poop, all that stuff. They love it.
Yeah.
So it's an easy conversation without it being embarrassing.
That's right.
I think when it comes to kids, we get embarrassed, which is our issue. It's not them,
And it's
right?
because
So
we never had these conversations, right? Talking about the birds and the bees. Think about all the jokes that are made about in movies and shows and, got to have that chat. But it really doesn't have to because it does come up. The questions
right,
come up even at 3 and 4 years old. You know, I remember telling my kids that your baby comes from your belly button because at 2 and 3, that's just as I have a big pregnant belly with a belly button sticking out. That made sense at the time.
Right.
But as they got old, I mean, that was just probably a disservice at that age too, but that's age appropriate until we get to those questions. But I think there's an idea that, we can have the conversations and keep it appropriate. That's my biggest thing is it doesn't have to be gross in a sense of like, sexual and inappropriate conversations. Keeping the words appropriate, like our language, keeping it
Right.
appropriate for any age, to be honest. Don't make it something that is I don't know what the right word is for that, but a touche kind of subject because our kids pick up on that,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I say this to dads sometimes too. I'm like, don't use vulgar words and don't use derogatory terms. That might be what you were raised understanding, but
Right.
we can do better. I think we
Right.
have the skills now to have these conversations with our spouses and
Hmm.
our kids. So maybe you don't have kids yet, right? Some of us got married and hadn't had a lot of experience with this or none at all, and suddenly you're talking about making a baby or having kids and you're both completely on different pages maybe of what that process looks like. Even
Right.
trying to have our fourth, I was still trying to explain to my husband what my cycle was. I'm
Right.
still trying to explain to him that, dude, there's only a window of like 2 to 3 days. You got to work with me. Right, no
Yeah.
pressure,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there is this complete lack of, like, it's a gap with men, I find, especially, but women too, and just understanding that process.
Right. Right. I think even like I've had more opportunity since my oldest got her period that we just talk through things like I'm really emotional today, or I'm feeling a lot of tenderness, right, or whatever.
Yeah,
So does that mean it's my period's coming early? Well, no, it could be that you're ovulating. Well, it's
right.
that. Well, this is when that happens, right? So it's just again when those conversations come up, being you're probably just off, or no,
Or
like
it's just
think about
PMS.
it.
Yeah,
Right. Right. Like where is she in her phase, and can we talk about that? Even if she's not in that phase, can we talk about like you
yeah,
have some different stages that you go through in the month? And I think it's just it makes it normal. It's natural. It's just yeah, that's what happens. It's okay. And it's something I think even as I don't know. I think as women we have an opportunity to really change how I guess the I want to say like the bad parts that seem to hang on generation after generation about periods and about like it drives me crazy. I have to say this. It drives me crazy when people are like, "Oh, I hate when I have my period," or that's the part that sucks about being a woman. Like people that say that,
yeah,
and I just think like, "Oh, I hope your kids are not hearing that because
yeah.
it's the miracle of being a woman. Like we need those things, and it's what makes us superwoman." Like I just think there's so
That's
much
right.
power in that, and you can frame it however you want. But if we don't frame it in a way that's positive, then that just gets cycled down over and over and over. Nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody's basically like, so you just don't want to live your life from whatever 11 to 55. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. It's the majority of your life, so why not embrace that and teach that in a way that's loving and kind? Doesn't mean that there's not parts that you don't enjoy,
Right.
or especially if you have a heavier period or more painful or whatever. But
You don't have to love it,
y-
but you don't have to
yeah,
spread hate either.
exactly, exactly. Like I think we still need to be in such admiration of what our body is capable of,
Yes.
and I think when we bring it from that place of wonder and awe, and like, wow, we're really cool, then that changes the conversation so much as we talk to our kids.
Yeah, when we've had some great conversations about that leading up to this, and I love that we're having this talk because I want us to bring attention that we need to change the narrative around our
Mhm.
reproductive health, both boys and girls, but specifically, like you said, the conversations around women's, periods and cycles and PMS and all of that, and the heavy negative connotations involved in that when our kids are listening, right?
Yeah.
It's really important that our girls and boys understand there's such beauty the way reproduction system is created to work. There is, things in that. There is, if you learn to understand it, right? I think that's key. Um, and I know you actually you did a summit recently, and you had someone I think talking about workflow as well with your cycle. Is
Yeah,
that
and
one
how
of the things you talked about?
yes, like I think it's so amazing the way just like our follicular cycle really, if you understand it, and I wish, like, again, this is one of those things, I wish I had known this younger when I was more active, like trying to figure out why I was dragging certain weeks. Like, you kind of get it, like you get that it's something to do with your cycle. But if I had known that I could have worked with it, like that,
Yes.
this is the week that I should basically do stuff that's, rote tasks I don't even have to think about. And then this is the week that if I want to really go for something, that's the week, like, you have all the creativity. Like, I just wish I had known that, because that
Mm,
is so useful. And so
yeah.
being able now to teach that to my daughter, and reminding her, right? Yeah, you know what? So take it easy this week if you're feeling that way. Remember, this is where you are in your
I love that.
cycle. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, right. Like next
Yeah.
week, go all in. You can do
Yeah.
it after 4 or 5 more
Plan
days.
back schedule, and where you're at in those phases and tracking it. I mean, I was saying
Yeah,
this, if you want to understand your fertility, it starts in your teens. It really does.
right,
Our egg health starts when we're in the womb. It's
right.
incredible. Girls, our egg quality is determined by our grandmothers, even. Like, it's quite powerful and profound when you see the impact of generational health on your
Mm,
reproductive cycles and
right.
your egg quality and how you ovulate, your follicular health, your ovarian health, all of that. We have, if you want to dive into epigenetics, and I'm hoping we're going to get to that as we go through the series, but we really do have a lot of control and power over this in many ways, that we can
Mm,
shift those genetics. But we also have so much that we can be grateful for, that, if you have a healthy family line and you have some good reproductive genes, you're going to be taken care of to a certain extent. On the other hand, if you don't, you also have the power to shift that. I
right.
think, again, it's not a conversation that a lot of people are having. It's the idea that, I'm my mom struggled, so I'm going to struggle. My mom had terrible, or my sister had terrible grades and skills. I'm going to have. That's how it's going to be, because it's normally conversations I hear between moms and daughters, siblings, right? It's, "Oh, that's
Yeah,
your aunt was like that. Oh, your mom was like that. Oh, you're just gonna be the same way." The
yeah,
number of times
yeah.
I've heard that, and I have to, like, stop myself sometimes, like, it's almost, speak blessing, not curses. What's fact to
Exactly.
you doesn't have to be fact for their life. It can be changed. So I think this conversation, and continuing the conversation around fertility health, and, you know, teaching our kids just to understand the basics, I
Hmm.
think that's the best way, best place we can start, really. So
Right. And
I
I
would
think,
love to know from you, though. I would love to know
yeah,
from you. So you do have, your daughter's in that age range. Mine's not there quite yet. We've got two that aren't quite there yet, who are asking a million questions.
yes.
I'm sure we need to get them on at some point on one of these. Um, but I would love to know from you with Mateo, with your son. I would love to know what kind of conversations have you had, because I'm getting some really funny ones now with my 14-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because last year in school, we went through a unit specifically on, like your body, but it was male and female. It walked through reproduction. It walked through, um, kind of just all the changes, and then all the biological parts, like, what you can actually see. And so he had a lot of questions around periods. He had a lot of questions around, like how getting pregnant. How do you get pregnant? How do you not? So I really like that, because he was curious enough, to ask some of those. And it was cute because he wouldn't ask them, right after he had the lesson. It would be like 3 weeks later. Then there'd be
Yeah.
some odd question after, our oldest had an outburst. And it was like, is that because she's gonna have her period? No, that's just because she's cranky. But
Yeah, make sure you look for that question.
that's right. You might be hit if you say that out
That's
loud.
great.
But it's really funny because he's the kid, and you know this, but he's the kid who's like already planned, like, what his marriage and his how many kids he's having, all that, since he was probably 7. I don't know, really young. So he wants to know, like, so, like, what things do I need to know when I have a girlfriend, and what things can I do? So even this week, he said to me, "Okay, so don't you guys carry like pads or something on you just in case?" And I'm like, "Well, I do." And he's like, "Okay, because I'm just thinking, like, maybe I should carry one in my pocket in case,
Uh,
a girl needs it, because that would be so embarrassing." And all he's thinking is, how horrible would that be for a girl to be caught without, right? And I'm like, I don't know if you could whip that out in public to some stranger, buddy. But the mindset is like, oh, you guys don't actually know for sure, like, it's absolutely gonna happen. So you should have something in the background. He goes, well, I'm going to make sure if I have girls that they know and that they have things available. Right. So I think just,
Okay, so just for the record,
again,
I think he's still single, right, ladies? Everyone?
yeah, he's
Okay.
still single. He's still single.
He's
He's
super
16 and a half.
adorable, really sweet. I'm just
Yeah.
putting him out there.
We'll take care of you and do all the stuff.
And have pads on
Um,
hand just in case.
that's right.
Wear
But,
diapers and wear pads.
that's right. But again, it's those little moments, right? To be able to correct things, to be able to speak into, like, this is a great idea, or this would be very supportive to most women. Make sure you have that conversation. Not all women will want to tell you that. Not all women are going to be comfortable around that. Some things you'll have to be aware of, and that'll develop as your relationship develops. But just having conversations, right? And same thing with fertility, like having those conversations about you can't get pregnant every single day, and like these are things that are precautions, and these are things that you need to be aware of, and fertility isn't easy for everyone, and just because we had no problem having babies doesn't mean everyone has no
Right.
problem. And so, like, again, it's those conversations, and he's very curious about like how the world, he's very science minded, so he's very curious, like, how do things work, and when things break down, why do they break down? So those tend to be our conversations. So often fertility conversations come up, those types of things with him. And I think, again, it's just good opportunity. Sometimes I have to Google it. Sometimes I have to be like, I don't know the answer, let's Google that.
Great way to learn,
But
right? Yeah.
yeah, but again, it's good conversation, and it preps, again, I think, from a boy's end, because they don't get this stuff. From a boy's end, it just makes them more sensitive to what the truth is, and what the future could be, and what the opportunities are, the possibilities are, and not to just be going in blindly
Yeah.
thinking, that this is just how the world works, because sometimes the world doesn't work that way. And sometimes people come from a different background, and they have a different
Yeah.
way of thinking about something, and certain things may not be talked about, right? So we've talked about that too, that the person that is your partner, their family may never have talked about it, and they wouldn't
That's
talk
right. You
about it
may
with
know
you
way more
either.
than they even know,
Right.
right? You may be telling them
Right.
about
So
their cycle.
yeah, like they may be shocked by that, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just good conversation. It's just good opportunity, right? To,
Well, and
again,
I
have
think
these.
typically it is falling on us as moms. It is falling on us
Mhm.
as women. And it's it's not something I begrudge. I like having these conversations because you're getting it firsthand, right? You're getting
Right.
firsthand
Right.
education experience from the person who actually goes through it. But I think it's fair, in some ways, to also understand that our husbands and our partners are rarely clued into any of this anyway, right? Like
Right.
they just don't know. Um, like I said, trying to just explain through trying to have a baby what cycle looks like and what days are fertile and what days, even helping your husband, even if you're not trying to have a baby, but trying to not have one, letting them
Mhm.
know that, okay, so the days that I'm most likely to be interested are probably the days we shouldn't,
Right.
which
Right.
sucks.
Right.
But if you're actively not using any other, forms of birth control, then you're going to avoid it on those days. It's
Right.
just, it's helping them understand there's going to be days in here where I don't even want to look at you. And then there's days in here where that's all I want. Right. And,
Right.
you better capitalize on those. I'm just going to let you know. Right. This is your chance to
Yeah.
capitalize on it. I'll probably not say no, not today. So I think it's those conversations that even as partners, we just don't tend to have. And there's a lot of
Right.
resentment and frustration and a whole
Right.
other world of hurt that happens simply by not understanding both of our hormone flow, maybe. But
Right.
again, it is more specifically women in that sense, because I don't know about most guys I know, it's drop of the hat anytime, anywhere, anytime. They
Right.
don't need any
Right.
special conditions.
Right. Well,
Whereas
and not
very
just.
few women do, right? We do
Right.
have
Right.
a cycle. We do have a moon cycle. We do have a pull on our body that is going to have an effect on mood and all of that kind of thing.
Right. And I mean, not just that. I think about like young couples, and I say this now with my oldest all the time, but if you don't know as a woman where you are in your cycle, and you tend to be more snappy, or mean, like if that just is how you display because you're more short-tempered during that kind of week before your period kicks in, that can put some huge kinks in your marriage. Like, it can cause
Yeah,
disaster,
definitely.
and or even in your relationship if you're not married yet or whatever. But like I say it all the time to our oldest is, okay, I just watched you. Like, I don't say it in the moment it's happening, obviously, but I just watched you respond like this. Are you aware of where you are in your cycle? And then usually she'll be like, well, no, I'm not, or yes, I am, and give me some feedback, so that then I can say, hey, listen, for the next few days, if you're feeling like that, move yourself out of the room. Like, If you
Yeah.
don't want to be around people, if you don't, want to have that kind of reaction and have your brother and sister hurt and upset for something that is not on them, like, you need to remove yourself. And so I think even as women, we need to be aware, because our communication just,
Yeah.
so for some of us, not all of us, but for some of us, it breaks down at certain times. So, like, if you want to keep a good relationship, whether it's with your kids, your partner, whatever, you need to know. Like, you
Yeah.
need to be aware. Am I like that at that point in time? Do I need to withdraw more often? Do I need to withdraw earlier from conversations if I can't
Yeah.
respond, in a way that's loving?
Or
There's
just
just things
letting
we
people
need to know.
know. Exactly, just
Yeah.
saying, "Listen, I'm feeling extra irritable today and
Right.
tomorrow, like, I can feel it, so if you could just go easy on me."
Right.
I've said that outright. It's the
Yeah.
same before my period, about 3 days before, I am highly irritable. Like, any
Mm,
little thing will, and I'm not an angry person, but I'm irritated, just like,
mhm.
anything can get me. That's why I bought earplugs. I legit bought I legit bought, like, sound blocking and semi sound blocking for in the car. I have
Yeah.
auditory sensitivity anyway, but I bought the semi blocking ones from the car because I did notice that I was extremely irritated by just the talking, the nonstop
Mhm.
talking,
Mhm.
even in our house. But it was definitely those days before my period. It got 10 times worse, and I'd be
Yeah.
much more snappy. But that was a solution for me. Even when I'm walking around
Right.
the house, I have them
Right.
in my ears because it just dulls
Right.
the chat.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's really important, and teaching that early on, and just saying, as opposed to it being that, again, it's, I grew up with all these, not family, from friends and school, all these derogatory comments about our
Yeah.
hormone cycle, right? Oh, go
Right.
take a
Right.
Midol. Go
Right.
take, you're just PMSing.
Right.
What's your problem? Is it just your
Or we just get
hormones? Are you
called
ovulating?
dramatic, right?
Yes.
We're just dramatic. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, it might
I
just
am
be that
dramatic for
time.
like 4 days of every month. Do you think you can pick out a cycle here? This is an actual routine.
Yeah.
There's a reason for this. Yeah, and I think that's more what I my heart is in this, is that I want to see our conversation shift. I want to see, as parents, as educators, just even as siblings, whatever it is, and having those conversations so that there's an understanding. There's a
Mhm.
respectful understanding of, hey, did you know that at this time of the month there is an actual, you know, tissue separating itself from your uterus and removing itself, and you are bleeding it out of your body. I remember describing it like that. I was holding my hands like this, and I'm like, the whole lining is pulling
Yeah.
away
Yeah.
and it is flushing out of your body. And my oldest was like, oh my gosh, that's what a period is? Yes,
Yeah.
that's terrible. No, right?
No,
It's not
it's amazing.
terrible. It's amazing, but there needs to be that level of respect of, yeah, it's pretty awesome as opposed to awful, but it does bring its challenges, right? And I
Yeah.
love those conversations you're having with your guys too. That's what's going to shift this for other generations. We just need more of us doing it. We need more of these conversations
Exactly.
with the boys and the girls, um, as they're coming up, because, again, at age appropriate stages and as their questions come up, answer them in just matter of fact ways. And if, like you said, if you don't know the answer, look it up or
Yeah.
email us.
There's so much info.
We'll look it up.
That's right. That's right.
Right? Yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's the fun of it, is if you do have a group of mom friends, if you do have other women friends, you're able to have these conversations and say, what were you taught? What do you know about this? How are you approaching
Yeah.
this with your kids? If you can get these conversations going as our village, then
Mhm.
it's gonna change. It's gonna help shift some of this. I think I do
Yeah.
remember, I think you read it as well, the Red Tent book,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Loved it.
Power,
Yeah.
powerful book. Read it. Ladies, if you have not read it's called The Red Tent, right? Is that
The red
correct?
tent. Yeah.
The Red Tent.
Yeah.
Just, keep, taking back the mystique and the powerfulness and the mystery and the beauty of our reproductive health and a
Yeah.
reproductive process. I think if
Yeah.
we can
Oh,
reclaim
and
that.
even
Yeah.
the beauty of that time period where women withdrew together and took care of each other while they were dealing with that time, gave them a break. Right, it gave them a break. And I say that all the time. It's something I have to do. Like, I know about 1 to 2 days in the month, I know I just need to either, like, go work at the coffee shop for half a day, or say, like, I'll be in my room for the next few hours, because I just need that withdrawal. But how much nicer to be able to do that with women who also
Yeah.
understand, yeah, you know what, I need that break too. And I think we don't do that. We don't care for ourselves through that. Instead, we just push through because, of course, in today's a day and age, it's like a badge of honor to do.
Yes.
But the reality is there are times in the month where we should be a little bit either like a hermit or nurturing, one or the other,
Yeah.
to take care of ourselves. And
Yeah.
that's a good thing. That's not a weakness.
Yeah.
And we
Well, and
need
that's
to
one
know
of
that.
the I think one of the cool things about it when you have close friends, I don't know if you've ever noticed, your cycles sync up, or the women in your
Yeah.
house, your
Yeah.
cycles all start to sync up.
Yeah.
Because again, that's just the way nature has made us. That's the way, we're naturally intended to be supporting each other through these stages of our reproductive cycle. So I think it's a nice idea, but like you said, we have to actively make it happen because we're living in a time where the stress and priority on our wellness are not matching up. We've got stress levels up here and ourselves as a priority way down here. So
Right.
definitely gonna have some work to do still. Getting that back to where
Yeah.
it needs to be. Well, hopefully this will help with some of these conversations. We can keep chatting about, reproductive health, our epigenetics and fertility and how we can take ownership for what we can, but then share the knowledge and the educating with the next generations and maybe our
Mhm.
spouses or partners as well and shift some of those conversations, right? And that information. So awesome.
Yeah, and some of that, just like to add two other things here. If that's a conversation that you haven't had with your partner, or if that feels super awkward, some of the best things you can say is, "What were you ever told about these things?" Right? Because then it's not personal. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of times when it feels personal, like you're asking me my opinion, then that gets awkward. But it's when you ask, like, what was it that you were told, or what was it that your family believed, or whatever, and it's not personal, right? It's just that thing that was passed down, and that can make it so much easier to have that conversation, and give you just that space of, oh, now I get now I
Yeah.
get why
Ah,
it is what it is,
yeah.
right? So that can be
Yeah.
really helpful. And the same thing with your kids, like if you can have those conversations when your partner's around, it's really
Yeah.
useful, because then everybody's on the same page and knows who said what, or at least let your partner know after the fact the conversation that happened. So that way, if there's more conversation, it could that from one of the children with dad, then it just keeps it all on the same page. Everybody knows where everybody's coming
Yes.
from, and that can be really useful.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember last summer when we were pregnant for the summer. But I remember when we first announced to everyone that we were pregnant, and our neighbors came over and gave us talking outside, and he's yelling off the back deck, "My sperm worked! My sperm worked!" And my kids are all in here hiding, like, "Oh, good Lord, what is he saying?" Like, they're dying laughing. And I mean, you know me, the initial me was like, "Oh my goodness, are you kidding me right now? Like, the whole neighborhood could hear you yelling this." But then on the flip side, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm actually grateful that he's a goofball sometimes and can share things in a fun way with our kids. Like,
Right.
it is
Right.
funny and they always get a kick out of the way he shares things, but it is always accurate, right? Like, he's
Right.
not wrong.
Right.
It's just he
Right.
brings a totally different, I bring the education side of it and he brings the, hey, this is hilarious side of it. So,
Yeah.
don't also put, expectations on your partners or whoever it is that's helping you co-parent, whatever that looks like. Make sure that you're leaving some space for who they are.
Right.
There's that balance too, because I know I would be the one who'd be quickly shutting it down and saying, don't talk like that. Like, don't share it like
Right.
that. You'll snuff it out real quick if you do that,
Right.
but
Right.
like you said, if you bring your individual personalities to it, as long as it's not in a vulgar or inappropriate manner, sharing it appropriately, age appropriately, and then, yeah, having those discussions so you are on the same page is definitely a good tip. That's important. Not that I would have been
Yeah.
yelling that off the back of the porch, but it did open some good conversations. I'll give you that.
I'm sure.
Anyway, all right. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. That was awesome. I am looking forward to definitely sharing some more about fertility as we go through this, but then we're going to head into pregnancy conversations too. And I know we're going to have lots to talk about that because that was just our
So
field of
fun.
expertise for so long.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you have an amazing week, and we will look forward to seeing you all on our next episode. And make sure you have followed and subscribed along. Leave us some reviews and comments. We'd love to hear what you think. And of course, questions. If you have any questions about this or just need some support on how you can share some of these topics with your kids in creative ways, reach out. We're more than happy to give you some ideas. Would you like to learn more?
Find me on Instagram and YouTube at Momdaze Podcast.